Hello, friends. Today we have the delightful Magus Erling, Kennedy Phillips. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, considering the circumstances. If some people have been following me, I've been dealing with the unenviable position of having to rebuild the bottom half of my house for the past 3 months.
Yeah.
We got furniture back yesterday, and the first thing that I did was sit down in my recliner and watch the first hour of A Knight's Tale, and then I had to go to bed.
Completely valid. Completely valid. You've been to a lot of things, and you've been very busy lately as well.
Yeah, a lot of different projects have been coming up lately. For those of you who don't know who I am, hi, I'm Kennedy Phillips, also known as Magus Serling on the social medias. You might remember me from such productions as Lackadaisy, most recently, as the sound supervisor on that. Hell of a Boss, I'm on the sound team on that, and the sound designer of the pilot of Has Been Hotel, which will be releasing a full series in July, if I recall correctly.
Nice. Who picked that up?
I'm also the creator of a podcast called Magus Elgar, which has about a season's worth of content available at maguselgar.com. And I'm currently working on a new mini-series in the same universe called Clutch a Kobold Story, which is how we met.
Yeah. Let me actually make sure that I have that link to Magus Elgar in the description, and it will be there. So this is technically... No, I wouldn't have it any other way.
I'm surrounded by like Foley props all the time. Like I've always got like some things in here. Like I was actually playing with this right here right now. This it's just like a hand exercise tool, which I do use on occasion, but I purposely like got it wet and let it rust a little bit so that I can do this.
Oh, nice.
So it's got like a nice squeaky sound to it.
And we can see just off camera on the right your ASMR microphone.
I've got a 3DO microphone that I was just doing some ASMR content with the other day.
I would love to go over a bunch of your Foley props later. I think that would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'd love to show you some, because I've got some weird ones.
But we got a handful of questions, and then I'm sure we'll have some questions from people in chat, and I'll probably toss a couple questions for you after the stream if I get questions and comments for you, just to make sure that everyone gets responded, because this is for the Go Godot Game Jam, as many of you are watching are aware, which is welcome. Glad you're all here. We did break 1,000 entrants for the jam itself, which is pretty great. Yeah. And how long have you been a sound designer for?
I have been a sound designer since technically I've been doing it since like 2007.
Okay.
But I've been in the industry since for about 10 years now.
Okay.
I actually started out making audio dramas in college for fun using a really janky program called WavePad. It was a single track audio editing program that was not built for what I was trying to use it for. Because every time that I would make a mistake or there was a sound effect that I didn't like that it was not put in properly, I'd have to start over. So every decision that I made had to be extremely deliberate.
Oh, wow. Do you think any of that bleeds over into your current stuff? Like, do you still have a little bit of that PTSD?
Absolutely. There's a lot of times where I'm like listening to this, it's like, okay, I need to make sure that this sound effect is where I need it to be. But, of course I do a lot of experimentation and stuff, which is a lot of fun. I just have the habit of when I'm experimenting, I will use a completely different sound, I'll use a completely different project file as opposed to like having it edit like within my production.
That is fascinating. I totally get that too. So as far as Lackadaisy goes, that came off pretty well. That became a major success. It even hit trending on YouTube. I think it even hit number one for a short time.
Yeah, it was trending for a good while, and I'm gonna be honest with you. I think it's like an almost 9 million views now.
Oh wow, that is incredible.
We're recording, we are at, let's see here, 8.2 million views. That's still a lot for a pilot.
That ain't bad.
That's pretty good. Not to mention, like, we keep the ball rolling and stuff, and a lot of people have been talking about trying to make it into a full series, but I'm not going to
Oh.
pretend that I was the crux of that production. See, what happened was when they were working, they had their composer and webcomic sound designer, M. Gower, who they are incredibly talented. They were the ones that were doing the sound design on it, but as they were getting close to like the 11th hour on the production, there were a couple of things that were missing that needed to be done, and Fable, the director, who's a very good friend of mine, had me on speed dial in case they ended up running into a kink such as this. Reason being that Fable and I worked together on Hasbin Hotel, and they saw how much of a difference it was when the sound, like before I got on and after. And we became very good friends and had been talking shop constantly, and I had expressed I was really excited about Lackadaisy. So they had me initially come on as a creative consultant to give advice and suggestions and ideas, which I had a lot of. And when every idea that they heard was like, "Oh, this sounds amazing. We want this right now." The sound designer was like, "I don't think we have time to do this. We've got like under a month." So then I went from creative consultant to sound designer to suddenly sound supervisor. Which is the equivalent. Which is the equivalent of like a guy leaving a comment in a movie theater to suddenly being the manager of the movie theater.
To be fair, that's basically happened to me a few times as well. So no, I do get that, and that is quite a trip. Just gonna get wrapped up in that. But it's also wonderful, right? You meet so many people that way, and it's
yeah. So like in a very short amount of time, I was the sound supervisor, where I gave a lot of advice to M for what they needed to make their production really good. But we had the production split into, I want to say, 5 reels. By the different acts, then the epilogue and the prologue.
Right.
And we needed a full team to enact the changes that we wanted to do. Like the sound design was about, I want to say, like 80% done when I got on board. But that last 20% like really like sharpened it to being something really, really good.
Yeah, there's not a lot of sorry, go ahead.
It really speaks volumes about how that last like fifth of your work can mean the difference between this is good work to this is something that everybody in the comments are like, this is phenomenal.
Absolutely. That last level of polish that gives it a lot of character.
Yeah, and I do not want to understate that M's sound design work is front and center on a lot of this. I was responsible for like, I want to say like a handful of suggestions and ideas, but M was the one that was implementing a lot of them under my supervision. The real challenge of what happened with this was less the sound design on my end and more my organizational efforts on it, because one of the first things that we had from one of our sound designers that I onboarded on this project was, okay, we're going to get ourselves an OMF, which is kind of like a document telling the computer what files they need to be grabbing and stuff. And the sound designer that I had hired said, great, what's that? I'm like, oh no. Because a lot of these sound designers, they're talented, but they haven't worked in a pipeline before, which is a completely different thing. Like you've performed a trumpet before, but you've never worked in an orchestra. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, or maybe you've worked in an orchestra, but you've never marched, right? Like, it's just, you're doing the same thing, but it ain't the same. There's a million other things you need to pay attention to.
It's a completely different logistical procedure.
Exactly. How do you train for that? How do you learn those type of skills that somebody who's trying to get into this industry, somebody who might want to be breaking into this field, how would they know about that specific thing, for example?
The logistics?
Yeah, how do you learn logistics? Because logistics aren't exactly taught in college most of the time. Usually college is more about just the mechanics.
Oh, I mean, like, the logistics for the college is definitely, like, part of the procedure. Like, when I went to Chapman University and there goes my cat. Kitty, no, not right now. Come here. Hold on. She's being like... There we go.
Hello, cat.
Hi, kitty. This cat gets in the way all the time, don't you?
It's a very good cat.
Okay, let's go away. Come on. Anyway, so, logistics, right? So when I was in college, we actually like protocol was like really etched into our heads because that was such a unsung hero about making your productions work. And there's like a pretty basic like pipeline and workflow to getting that to work right. It's just a matter of onboarding the people that you're working with and trying to discuss a cohesive pattern and workflow on what you need for your stuff, what you need for your work. Case in point, I just got hired to sound design a visual novel.
Okay.
And the person who is writing the visual novel is like, okay, well, here's all that we need. We're using this particular game engine. And I'm like, okay, with visual novels, you're just getting a suite of sound effects. You're not attaching it to any like nodes that are like models, like 3D models or something like that. But you've got like certain events and stuff. So give me a list of the kinds of sounds that you want, and we're gonna like label them like one after the other. Dialogue, for example, is like done by like script for certain decisions that are made and lined up like that. Just like file naming conventions are such an important part of visual novels. Because you might end up like losing track if you just have like this one A, this one B, this one I swear it's this one this time, this one kill me.
B_revision 2.
I'll be honest, like when I was, because of like some of the logistics and like some things that was like a little bit of a disparity between the mixing room that I was working in and the theater that we were going to be broadcasting this movie in for my thesis, I went through 56 final cuts.
Wow.
It was a nightmare.
I bet.
I got nominated for an award for that thesis for my sound design on that, so I was happy about that. But 56 cuts.
What just as this frame of reference for people, what is the normal number of final cuts?
A normal amount of final cuts is probably like
3, 5.
I'd say 8 if like
8, okay.
if you're like going back and like making finagles or whatever like that. I've seen people like do more, I've seen people do less, but usually there's not a disparity between the movie theater and the mix room, and usually ideally you would want one.
Yeah, in an ideal world, but
I mean, like what is it? We went through, I want to say 4 or 5 final cuts for for Lackadaisy. And that's just because like we'd go back and like if you missed one thing in the final cut, you'd have to do a new cut because you'd have to make sure that it was like you have to reprint it and make sure it's integrated into there.
Right. Now, did you read the comic? Out of curiosity, did you read the Lackadaisy comic?
I knew of the comic and I read a little bit of it when I was when I was like younger, when it was first announced, because when I saw one of my go-to things that I'll do is I'll see an animated show that it's being like offered on Kickstarter and being like, do you need sound? Because most of the time they do. And they do good work. I ended up reading more of it after Lackadaisy came out. It's such a gorgeous webcomic. Like it's one of those
really
few
is.
that like I've read a couple of web comics in the past. Like I've read Prequel. I've read I want to say oh my gosh, it's been a very long time. I remember reading like I think it was like Elephant Men, which eventually got turned into like a graphic novel series. I can't remember. I remember Welcome to the Blast Wave. Oh yeah, there was also like Darths and Droids I read for a little while.
Oh, I remember that one.
But like there's like a lot of like really cute like web comics out there that you don't really get to see turn into an animated show.
Yeah. I followed a lot of webcomics back in the era when Lackadaisy was popular, mostly because I was working a job where, that was what I did in my free time. I'd find a new webcomic and just devour the entire thing top to bottom. And Lackadaisy was one of the ones that I kept on rereading multiple times. The layouts, the visuals, everything was absolutely
The
stunning.
sepia tone that eventually turned into like these gorgeous oil style paintings.
Mm-hmm.
Like every
And
frame in that animation is, or every frame in that webcomic is like an absolutely
absolutely,
beautiful experience.
absolutely stunning. And you could, I dare say, and I mean, you'll be able to add a lot more to this. I dare say that you can sort of feel the soundscape of the comic by reading it, right? What at least.
Actually, what I would say about that is that there is a huge difference transitioning from webcomic to animation when it comes to sound design.
Really? Please elaborate.
The reason for this is that, like, when I was talking to Tracy had made a very strong point that Lackadaisy is a story that can function if everybody was human, but they just happen to be cats.
Right.
There's nothing going on in the webcomic that is intrinsically tied to the fact that they are cats.
Right.
The cats are like icing on the cake.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're in animation, suddenly you can't ignore that they're cats. Because the animators are going to animate them like cats.
Mm-hmm.
And with that comes into the sound design, where there's a lot of things that translate between webcomic and animation that does need to be adapted. Case in point, Rocky. Rocky is an incredibly verbose character. He's waxing poetic. He's speaking 50 words when 5 are necessary. And everybody is talking in a very, like, Frank Miller-esque soliloquy every 15 minutes. And that doesn't translate very well into animation because that's just going to make Rocky come off as incredibly pretentious and circumstantial. They're going to be like, okay, come on, just get to the point. So, like, a lot of his stuff is not dumbed down so much as
distilled, maybe
compressed.
Mm-hmm.
Like his vocabulary is still quite extensive, but he's speaking single sentences.
Yeah.
Like there's a line in it where it's like, well, you've been driving so poorly, you've confounded the enemy. Nicely done. Like that's like one sentence where, like, in the webcomic it'd be like almost a paragraph.
Though I will say, though, they did give him the opening sequence. I'll say monologue / song. I don't know which is more appropriate.
The original poem. Yeah, that poem was written by the creator of the webcomic.
Oh, really?
It is actually word for word a copy of the poem that they use in the webcomic.
Nice.
But like they wanted to. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that, even by doing that, they establish him as somebody who would be that pretentious and that wordy, so that later on, when he only says one line, the viewer still recognizes that this is a person who would go on. This is a person who is very extra. I feel like they set that up very nicely.
Yeah, they did a good job not only doing that, but establishing the tone of this experience. Because one of the big things about Lackadaisy in particular is that because it happens in media res of, like, after the Lackadaisy had lost its heyday, they wanted to establish a sense of nostalgia and a feeling of, like, this is what we look for in this speakeasy. This is what Rocky sees with this speakeasy. And we also get a glance into, like, his own internal psyche, which is what one thing that I added with in terms of, like, sound direction was all the sounds of, like, the speakeasy mixing with the sounds of the river and the riverboat and wind and even instruments being added in as part of Rocky's movement. That was all something that I suggested to add into that sense of subjectivity for that character. Like when he's walking around, you hear tap dancing shoes, despite the fact that he's not wearing tap dance shoes. And you also hear like a jazz ensemble. Pardon me, a jazz ensemble, like riffing on some cymbals.
It just feels right for the character, right?
Yeah, it added so much to that atmosphere because one of the things that we put at the very beginning that I actually insisted to the director and the creator that that people wear headphones when they're listening to the show. The reason for this is that there are a lot of times where I've been working on Hell of a Boss for 3 years now, and for a time I thought that a lot of my sound work was getting buried because of the mix and because of where I was listening it on YouTube. And it wasn't until I put on headphones that I started really listening and being like, oh no, it's all there. It's just I've been listening out of crappy YouTube. I've been listening out of crappy computer speakers and my cell phone, which is not an ideal experience for sound design. Like for sound, when it comes to like cell phones and the like, you're only hearing like the very front of the sound effects, like something that's like as loud as the dialogue. And you can only do so much to make that sound good. There's like a difference between like creative sound design and mixing. Creative sound design is like the sound you hear when the T-Rex gives their roar in Jurassic Park. Like, oh, what did they do to build all that stuff? But the mix is kind of like the watercolors of a background of a painting. It helps paint a picture. It helps give you an idea of where you are and what you're doing. So when you wear headphones, like we encouraged, when you're going through Lackadaisy, you can hear like an almost binaural experience of just the.
I was actually about to ask exactly that.
Around.
Did you actually use binaural effects in it directly, or is it just sort of that sense?
We did some mixing to make that work, because binaural is something that's always been there. It's just more of like the difference between like using like a 3DO microphone where they actually like match the shape of the ears, and just really good mixing. In most environments before like ASMR was a big thing, it was just 5.1 surround sound for a lot of the things that gave you that engrossing experience. But a lot of people have been listening to stuff with their headphones a lot more, where you can just kind of like close your eyes and still soak in the environment. And that's what makes Lackadaisy so strong, is that even in its quiet moments, you can close your eyes and still be in the space just by listening to it.
Yeah, and Lackadaisy has always had, in the comic, like even just going to the comic, some emphasis on music. There's always been this, this people dancing, people playing instruments has always been a core part of the comic. And I wanted to ask about the integration of music. Did you work with a composer at all? How does the music relate to the overall experience from your perspective?
Well, the sound designer is the composer in this one.
Okay.
M was the lead composer on this stuff and had everything mixed in for Lackadaisy before I showed up. But
oh, okay.
There were a lot of it really came down to mix, which I was very present for. The big issue about working with a composer and working with the sound design is that you are effectively living in the same space. What I mean by that is that you only the human ear can only perceive so many frequencies, and the speakers can only broadcast so many frequencies. So when you have the music, which has their own gamut of frequencies and sounds and tones that they want to project, and the sound design, which has its own suite of frequencies, sounds, and tones, they're all trying to shove in through the same door.
Right.
And that makes it very challenging, which is why mix is such an important aspect of, at least when it comes to animation and like film in general, because a bad mix can make something nigh unwatchable. I got two examples of like really bad mixes that like really matter, but like they're problems in two very different ways. First one is like bad all around, and that's Felix the Cat the movie. Have you ever heard of this movie?
I've heard of it. I haven't seen it, but I've heard stories. But I do. Go on.
So Felix the Cat is a film that has legendary bad mixing. Mostly because they'll have like these grinding, whirring sounds and all of that stuff happening with like these robots moving, and you can't hear anyone talking because it's so loud in the mix. But also because a lot of the frequencies in those sounds are similar to this one character who's like speaking very gently, and she's doing that because she's trying to maintain her voice, but you can't hear her.
Mm. And that's extremely relevant for game design as well, when, in this sort of mixing requirement, because... Sorry, I'll let you finish your thought on that. I mean, before I jump into my...
Yeah, like sometimes it really comes down to like dialogue, sometimes it comes down to the reverb, them not using it right, and sometimes it's just bad quality microphones. But
I've seen...
Go ahead, what were you saying?
I was going to bring up a very good game that has terrible mixing, and that's Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Great game, but the mixing is actually pretty bad, because I believe they just leave the sound source on the character model, and then when the camera goes out to a cinematic distance, they don't remix it. They leave the audio pickup where the character model is.
And that has a problem.
Yeah.
Where, like, they just sound like they're 50 miles away.
Yeah, but the background audio, that's tied to global. That's not bad.
There was an interesting thing I saw a while back. I'm going to get back into the other movie example, but I was just reminded of somebody made a mod to a game where voice chat was directly tied to the physical models of where you were. So you actually heard like distance of someone screaming at you if they were approaching you in a first-person shooter, which was really cool and very immersive.
Yeah, that's
it
actually
also
a function
meant you
that
could
we're working
spy on enemy conversations.
We're actually working on that function in a game that I'm in development of. Not going into too much detail, but yeah, that's actually a part of what we're doing. It's like, ooh, this is gonna be fun.
There's an old Kraken video of him playing like this Russian first-person shooter that had that feature, and there's a moment where like he creeps over to a wall and presses his ear against the wall, and suddenly he is lambasted with hundreds of Russian call-outs. All happening at once, just because he's pressing his ear against the door, and it's like, oh, okay. But
nice.
Going back to the other mixing thing.
Yes.
One that is a legendarily bad mix. Not because it was poorly mixed initially, but because it was not mixed for home video, was the first Matrix movie.
Yeah.
So in theaters, it's mixed fine. Like it sounds great in theaters, because I remember, because I was in theaters when I was listening to it, and I never had any of these problems. But anybody who watches The Matrix on home video or even on streaming will tell you the mix is very bad, because you have to ride that volume knob like you're a DJ, because whenever they're quiet, whenever they're talking, just in a talking scene, everyone is speaking in such gentle, dulcet tones to make you contemplate the nature of existence. The finger, and you give me a phone call, and so you're just like, I can't hear this, and then all the kung fu sounds come out, and you have been blasted across the room,
which is great in IMAX.
So like you can't hear anything when they're talking about important plot stuff, and then when a fight scene happens, you're jumping out of your seat and ratcheting the volume down 30 decibels.
So how...
It's just because it was not mixed for home video. Home video, everybody's got a different space. So like mixing for stereo or 5.1 surround sound in those environments and stuff, they don't boost the dialogue as they need to.
How hard would that be to reconfigure? Is that something you could just whirlwind slam a dynamic range button, or is that something that you need to go through and micromanage everything for?
You would have to go back and adjust the levels on almost everything.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
It would take, like, I would say, like, for a movie like that, it would probably take you like 2 or 3 weeks of work, but it's doable. Like, you'd have to remaster the audio, and that would take time, because there's so many questions that go into when you're mixing, like what's the audience mostly going to be listening on this to this on. That's actually like a mix. Funny enough, I have in my possession a 5.1 mix of the pilot of Has Been Hotel.
Oh,
and it sounds fantastic. Never going to be able to watch it anywhere outside of a movie theater, though, because most people that are watching the Has Been Hotel pilot are watching it on YouTube on their cell phones, which is usually generously a mono speaker.
Yep, and even if it's not, I don't think YouTube algorithm, or not algorithm, but YouTube encoding really works for 5.1.
Not
in
very well.
general? Yeah, not
I
effectively.
mean, they have it, like they've got some stuff in movies and all that stuff, but like YouTube is still
Well,
running
yeah.
through your PC card, unless your PC card is like built specifically for 5.1 mix. You're mostly just going to be getting a slightly wider stereo mix, which
Yeah,
is
it makes
just
sense.
2 channels.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, in this case, you kind of got a whole bunch of stuff handed to you all at once. Is that normal? Or what is normally handed to you when you get asked to join a project? What is the folder that gets handed to you? What do you get?
Okay. Oftentimes, tragically, sound design is not very high on priority for a lot of filmmakers. And that case is very apparent for animation as well, because most animators are not taught the procedure for sound design, mostly because why would they? A lot of animators are mostly just gonna draw the pictures and then send it off to somebody else to do the thing. But nowadays, animation is very indie, more so than it's ever been before. I mean, ever since there's been plenty of animators that have like gone their own way and gone like fully independent. Don Hertzfeldt is one of the first that I can come to mind. The guy who made Rejected cartoons and the absolutely spectacular World of Tomorrow. Highly recommend watching that trilogy at some point. I think the first episode, the first one of those short films is on YouTube.
Oh, really?
Okay. But now a lot of animators are like doing their own thing, and a lot of them don't know what to do in regards to sound design. Many of them do it themselves, which is a choice. Not that like a lot of sound designers aren't not that a lot of animators aren't talented out there. There are spectacular sound designers and animators.
Absolutely. But it's
like
a different skill
one
set.
that I love giving a shout out to is Terminal Montage. He does the Something About series, and a lot of his sound effects are memes and stuff, but his sound design is so crunchy and impactful that it adds so much to the experience.
Nice.
Like there's a bit where he has I'm not sure if you've watched any of his videos, but there's a video, one of my favorites of his is Something About Yoshi's Story, which was him doing a parody of the N64 game Yoshi's Story. And there's a bit where like this elephant is standing like guard at a gate or whatever, and one of the Yoshis throws an egg into his trunk, and he cuts up the sound of an elephant freaking out, and has the elephant like have a seizure before he just hits the ground, and it's one of the funniest things I've seen. That and the bit of like the what do you call it, the Yoshi being fed all of the fruit in the level all at once, and suddenly like grows like 4 times its normal size and is like pleading for help, is just, it gets me every time. But
so,
when I'm handed assets for these productions, oftentimes the film or the animation is like 90% done.
Gotcha.
And for animation, this is especially important because if I'm only given an animatic, I don't have reference on where to go. Like, they'll be like, oh yeah, he walks across the way. I'm like, well, I can give you an approximation, but if you animate it and he has a different gait cycle than what I'm assuming, then that's going to sound wrong.
Yeah.
So what I'll normally get is I'll get a folder with all the dialogue already synced up to like the lip sync and everything like that, and a video file.
Okay.
They'll hand those off to me, and sometimes the editor will get a little cute and add like their own sound effects to it, which is great because a lot of times editors have like really great choices in sound effects. Nico Coleo, who does Ollie and Scoops, edited Zoophobia before I got my hands on it, which I'm actually wearing the shirt for. He did a lot of sound design in his edit before he handed it off to me, and like a lot of the stuff that he did was like, yeah, I wouldn't change this. This is great.
Nice. That's good.
But yeah, from there I end up like building the ambiences, the footsteps, all the clothing rustle, any like cartoony noises or atmospheres and stuff like that. Because with live action, you are given an approximation of like the scenes of like the live action stuff. Like the room tone, the clothing rustle, the dialogue, and all that stuff. That's all like kind of married within the same space, and they have like ways that they divide it and stuff, and you have to integrate the ADR in there. But animation, you just have the dialogue. You have to build everything else yourself, like from scratch. With live action, you have an approximation of the scene, and you can like add a little bit of creativity to there to add like more oomph to the environment. But animation, you are building it ground up, at blank canvas. Sky's the limit. It lends you the opportunity to get really creative.
So animation gives you more flexibility in what you are able to do, is what you're saying? And
yeah, I mean, like, the nice thing about animation is that you never leave pre-production. There is never a point where you can tell yourself, all right, we got to stop everything because we don't have the coverage for this one thing that we need to do. You could be like, oh, we need coverage of this one character wiggling his butt a little bit for like another 3 seconds. Slap it on there. Go for it. It's not like stopping you.
Make it happen.
You don't have to ask the cartoon character to fly back to Burbank and pose in front of a green screen so they could staple that nonsense into the front of the project. It works on your time. And by your time, I mean the animator's time, as they cry, that knowing that they have to go back and draw more frames.
At worst, they might have to go into a mocap studio, but there's mocap studios in every major city, so, that's not going to be as difficult.
You don't even have to do mocap in major cities. Just grab some of those like HTC Vive things. Get a Kinect. True. There you go. It's janky, but it works.
My full body tracking is actually on the way. I've done mocap before, and I'm looking forward to doing it again. Good stuff.
As long as you're not like needing to get one of those like $10,000 mocap bodysuits, which is designed for someone who's 5'9". Thank you very much. No, I'm not bitter. I, a man who is 6'5".
So, yeah, please do go on.
In terms of assets, given what I really love about like working with animation is that there's a lot of times where I will talk to the director about an idea. And since I'm usually like really late to the party, these ideas are not introduced to them until very late. But since animation never leaves pre-production, if they like an idea, they'll go and do it.
They'll make it happen.
If it is something really good enough. Like there's a lot of times for like, yeah, all the colors are done, all the animation's done, stuff like that. We cannot add more time to this sort of thing. But
which is fair. That's a scope and project management issue.
Or discuss the idea early enough, and you can make it such an important part of your process.
Because you have a direct line to the animation team.
Yeah, you can make the sound as important a character in your story, in your animation, as the colors. Case in point, like with Lackadaisy, all the prologue stuff where like we added like the orchestra and everything like that, the sound very easily massaged into the visuals because it was already very subjective. But there's also like some movies that I've seen where like the percussion or the rhythms and the sound design and stuff really comes front and center. And I want to preempt a little bit about that because you had mentioned to me a little bit before of like what I would consider to be like a flex in sound design.
Yeah.
A good flex in sound design is when you can tell that the production needed to have sound design in pre-production to plan out a sequence. This meant that the director and the writer and everybody involved made the decision, no, sound is important here. I want to provide 2 examples because I keep doing
please.
One is a film, and the other is a video game that just came out recently.
Okay.
The film is by a director, Edgar Wright, who I have so much respect for because he always puts his emphasis on post-production. He's a phenomenal editor, phenomenal sound, and puts so much emphasis on sound design. Most people would say like Scott Pilgrim's a really great example because they intersperse like a lot of like video gamey sound effects in there, and that does add a lot. But the film where he puts the most emphasis on his sound design and his music is Baby Driver.
Oh.
Baby Driver's a musical, but not in a traditional sense. Nobody breaks out in a song. Nobody sings the music. Nobody like speaks the lyrics of the song or anything like that. But it is a musical in the fact that every bit of sound design, every bit of rhythm, every single song is done to the beat of a tempo. Everything they move, everything they act on. The opening credit sequence is the main character dancing through the streets, and as he's walking through the streets, the graffiti on all the walls and posters and stuff through the streets have the lyrics of the song that he's listening to.
Oh, wow.
And every step, every movement that he's doing is a dance number. And you'd think that they said, oh, we're only going to be doing this for like the certain music segments, but no, the entire movie is done to the beat of the music. Even in the waiting scene where the main character ends up meeting gross man Kevin Spacey, like they're tapping and they're folding, like they're playing with cards or money or something like that, and it's a percussive rhythm that reminded me of like an old Nickelodeon television series called The Space Between Mr. Freer's Ears, which if you want to learn about how sound design can make such a big difference to something, find one of those segments on YouTube. I'll play it for you after this interview.
Please,
see what
I'd
I mean, because that's where I fell in love with sound design. Is those segments. But the other one that was a really big one that'll be more important for you game designers out there is a video game that came out with no advertising, had absolutely no trailers or anything like that before it was released. It came out the day that they announced that it existed. Hi-Fi Rush.
Oh, yeah.
Hi-Fi Rush is a video game that is a spectacle fighter paired with a rhythm game. So think if Devil May Cry meets Crypt of the Necrodancer, or Beat Saber meets God of War. And they go beyond just making the rhythm thing like a quirky aspect of the game. It is intrinsic to the experience. And the best part is, you do not need to have a good sense of rhythm to be able to play that game.
Really?
The way that it works is that when you are playing with your controller, let's say I've got a controller right here, this Steam controller that I used for a little while until I realized that my thumb is bigger than most of the buttons on this thing.
Steam controller is surprisingly good.
I like it. It's good for like PC games, playing on a console or playing on television. If you want to play Civilization with a touchpad. In most rhythm games, you press a button, and if it's not in time, you hear like a discordant like plonk or something like that, and the character's like stumbles out of rhythm. But in the game, he's still on beat to the rest of the world, because the whole storyline involves him having an MP3 like embedded into his chest, so he's always to the beat of the music. So you press a button, and if you're out of tune, he swings it in time to the beat, but it's not as like ceremonial. It's not as like big. But if you hit the button to the beat of the song, a backing track cheers you on with each hit, and you do extra damage, and you do a combo, and you do extra pieces that add to your meter, and so on and so forth.
So rather than penalizing...
Sorry, go ahead.
So rather than penalizing you for failing to meet the beat, it just encourages you when you do, which is just a great idea.
And it goes even a step further. It's not just your character moving to the beat of the music. Everything in the background is bouncing to the beat, so you can keep that tempo going on in the background. There's like a little cat bubble, a little cat sphere named 808 that is bouncing to the beat of the music. There's a tempo tracker that you can add at the bottom to see the timing for it to keep going. They take every single opportunity to educate the listener and the player how to use their system for rhythm. And then they go a step further, which is something that I rarely get to see in video games, let alone like anything. And that is every single sound effect, like everything from like slams to transformations to ambiances and the like, is all in the beat also. So like
nice.
there's a boss fight that you have named 1 Million, who's he's like this testing robot, and he brings out these big rocket launchers, and it's played to like a Yellow Card song. Hold on, I'm trying to figure out what the name of the song. Too Big to Fail. Which is Nine Inch Nails song. And like as he's bringing out like his big rocket launchers, in between like one of the cutscenes, you hear like the machines come out and go, and it's like a big like percussive symphony, and every song is like this, and it's so cool.
Nice.
There's a fight scene where they mix together like one of Beethoven's big suites with like some dubstep thing, and it's all timed to the beat of this giant robot coming at you, and it's so cool.
That sounds amazing. So they started with the sound design and then made the game around it, if it was what it sounds like.
Essentially, yeah. And this is a game that was like, that had no trailers or anything like that, and it was made by the people who did oh my gosh, the name of the Evil Within, of all things, which was like a
Really?
Resident Evil knockoff. Like, I'm like, this is way too cool for you guys to have come from roots that safe.
Well, if there's one thing that I've learned in the games industry, is that playing it safe never is. You know, if standing out is the best way to be safe. If you try and conform to it too much, then you'll just get, you know, make something that has already been made. You know.
Yeah, but like I highly recommend. Like, I'm not sure if you guys are ever going to be doing like rhythm games or something like that in the future when you make your stuff, because rhythm games are hard. Because you need to time the tempo of the control, the percussion, the controller to so much of the scene. But sound design and music is such an important part of your gameplay experience in ways that you might not even consider. Even down from like little like composing beats. Two games that I love talking about on that is Just Shapes and Beats, which is a
fantastic
rhythm-based bullet hell. Where it is just a bunch of shapes that you're dodging around and stuff, but the music is really snappy, and like everything like pops, and it's running at 60 frames a second, and it really feels good when you're playing around. And
it's visceral.
This way, it's very visceral. Not to mention, like, all the buttons and all the interactions and stuff feel percussive and very like satisfying to listen to. Like think about that feeling you got when you had let me find a good example. Okay. You ever play a game with a GameCube controller?
A little. That was a system that I skipped, but I'm familiar with it.
Something that I really liked about the GameCube controller is that they had hexagons around the control stick. So that when you snapped on one side or whatever, it would slip into a groove of one of their cardinal directions. It actually might be an octagon. I'd have to check. But the point is that what I used to do is I would rotate my thumb along the controller, and you'd hear like this really satisfying click, 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 and that made it fun to use that controller. Even in this controller, there's a little bit of like visceral feedback that you get, like these little back controllers here, the back buttons on the Steam controller I like, because it feels good.
Yeah.
Not to mention
just idly clicking those all day
long. The touchpad on this thing, it vibrates a little bit, or you could program it not to do that if you don't like that. But it gives you that feedback, and sound adds a lot to it. The other one that I was thinking of. You ever play Super Mario Odyssey?
Yes.
Do you know? And you also played Super Mario Galaxy, I assumed.
I actually never have. Super Mario Odyssey was my first 3D Mario game.
Nuts.
So I went into it with no
Galaxy
nostalgia.
Has this theme called Rosalina's theme, and it's the theme that plays when you're in the watchtower in space in Super Mario Galaxy.
Okay.
and the song's like da 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 da. It's like a very graceful waltz, and it's got like a really nice warm feeling to it because it feels like home when you're listening to it. In Super Mario Odyssey, they added a little feature when you pause the game. It goes doo doo doo, and then you move to another menu. It goes doo doo doo, a third menu doo 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 doo, and it goes through that theme. Just going through the menu. Like, just going through the menu is a fun experience. Yeah.
Some of the Zelda games, I believe, do that too. At least, it's like really nice touch.
It's the leitmotif that adds to the experience of, okay, I am in a Zelda game, or I am in a Mario game. But the great thing about sound design is you don't need to have a suite of unique sound effects to make that work. You and I recently played through a video game that used recycled assets from 5 other games made by the same developer, but was recycled in a way that kept it coherent and consistent with everything that was going on around it, and they just added to the experience. And that was Inscription. Inscription is a masterclass in tone and minimalist sound design used in a way that is deeply impactful. Every character in that game has a unique sound quality to them.
It really do.
Where there's no voice acting in this game, not really. They're like the most that you'll get is like a pirate making a yarg sound, or a voice actress like giving like a ooh kind of sound, but it's like used as sound design. Like the error sound effect, where it's like the or like the buzzing sound or whatever, or sounds that he's used that Daniel Mullins has used in The Hex, in Pony Island. But he uses them in ways that are familiar and impactful by using them sparingly. Not to mention, like, all the sounds have like a very brutal quality to them. Like, even just like selecting a menu sounds harsh and unwelcoming.
That's actually something I wanted to touch on. So I'll finish your thoughts, but I want to touch on the idea of a soundscape, of trying to make sure that all of your sounds in a particular, whether it's a scene or an entire series or a show or a game or what have you, trying to keep them in a cohesive set. How important is that? How much is that a focus when you're working through some of your design? Because I can think of a couple games, like you say with Inscription does that. You know what game also does that really well? Final Fantasy VIII.
Yeah.
You might be
Final
like
Fantasy's
actually
always been good with its sound design.
Yeah. But 8 in particular, a lot of the audio that's used, both in the sound design and the music, has a much more hollow, open, naturalistic feel to it compared to what came before and after. That idea of the soundscape. Yeah, sorry, go on. Please.
I would say when it comes to sound design, your mileage may vary. Like, it depends. There's a lot of times where people have done like non-cohesive sound design, but in a way that still works. I've had some people like mix like 8-bit sounds with like modern sounds, and it's okay. But like, you really want to figure out the kind of style that goes along with it. Sometimes a lot of game developers will have their composer also be the sound designer, and in a tight environment that can be ideal. Especially if you're like the composer like has a little bit of experience with doing sound design. I don't have a lot of experience with music, but I have worked with music and I've edited music to make it work. There's a lot of times when you could just have like the basic stuff, like a simple Unreal Engine sound pack or whatever that you want to recycle. The Unity engine's got some sound effects that you can use.
Yeah.
But the way that I see that is that you have to be careful on how you use those. By the way, I'm not looking at the camera right now because I'm trying to turn on the lights in here because the sun's going down over here.
See, I don't have that problem.
Well, now I'm like bright orange. If I do this too much, so let me turn this down a little bit. There we go.
Yeah, the lighting here is pretty constant, I'd say.
Okay, that's better. I'm not like looking at like I'm on the surface of the sun. Anywho, so the best sound design in animation in like video games are usually the ones that you can listen to a sound effect and immediately know where it's from.
Mm-hmm.
One problem that I have with a lot of RPG Maker games, they always use the same sound effects.
Mm-hmm.
And that unfortunately has the negative connotation of reducing the identity of your production.
Makes it less unique, right?
Yeah, but like there's plenty of games that have been made with RPG Maker that are really good and have a unique sound design.
Mm-hmm.
Like To the Moon has used RPG Maker. If I recall, Lisa used Lisa the Painful used RPG Maker.
Oh yeah. Yume Nikki, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, Omori used RPG Maker.
Omori, really? Oh, okay.
Yeah, Omori is an RPG Maker game, and it's very like you would not be able to tell.
No.
But yeah, like everybody uses To the Moon as like the gold standard of RPG Maker games, putting it on the map because it was one of the few that was like, wow, it's incredible that this game was made using RPG Maker. But like one of the simple things that you can do, just like it doesn't have to be like groundbreaking or like something like really crazy. Just have like a synthesizer or like even just simple props that can add to it. And the idea is, does it sound fun? Does it sound good? Does it sound like something pleasant that you'd like to listen to? If it's like aggravating or grating or something like that, you probably don't want to use it unless that's what you're trying to pull across.
Intentionality.
But if you listen to Undertale, like it's not just the music that's good in that game. Like the simple sound effects that they have, even just the character crawl talking across the screen, or even in Banjo-Kazooie where they have like the characters doing the like that. It's got a unique feel to it. It's not everybody's feel. It's not everything that everyone's here for, but it's better to make a creative decision that not everybody's going to agree with than to make no creative agreement that everybody's going to agree with.
Little Gator Game did that as well, and it really fed this feeling. That one in particular, but in all of these situations, Banjo-Kazooie as well, where there's no actual lines that are voiced specifically, but I can tell you the voice of every single character in it. I can tell you how every character sounds.
Just by tone.
Exactly.
Or like Later Alligator, where like the characters talking, they use like these cute little bubble pops of with like every word that would come up on screen. It was very cute, and it was very cozy.
Great game.
Or going back to Inscription, the sound of the main cabin dweller, Leshy, has this like very harsh, vibrating sound. You're like, oh, his voice is like deep and very intimidating. You're like, ooh, I love the way he speaks, because there's moments in it where like a character is talking like the Stoat, and he's got like a very nasal sounding like beep, 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 beep. But then when Leshy comes in to interrupt the Stoat, it's like, oh geez, okay, I'll calm down.
And you know instantly.
Yeah, like there's a character like, we just gotta get out of here, and he's like, sit down. And you're like, okay.
Sitting.
Yeah, Later Alligator was made by Small Boo, which I will say, like with Small Boo, their sound design chops are a little hit and miss. Like I loved their sound design in Later Alligator. But recently they did an animated pilot for Aaron Hansen about like him working at a theme park. I can't remember the name of it, but the sound design wasn't quite there. Like it really shows like there are some sound designers that excel in some areas and are lacking in a couple of others. Small Boo is beautiful when they are doing like little tiny cozy sound design. But when they got to do like big hits and like really big action scenes or something like that, they have a bit of a hard time with it.
Mhm.
But that's mostly because a lot of their stuff is based more heavily towards like humor and the quieter moments and like the smaller, cozier aspects of their animation, which again,
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that. Like everybody's got their strengths.
Mhm.
Like I've got
Being
my weaknesses in sound design also.
such as?
I would say in terms of my weakness in sound design, I have a hard time with creatures.
Oh, okay.
Mostly because I don't have a lot of access to creature sound effects, and I don't really have a lot of good emphasis on some of those. I've been able to make some, and I've been able to do a pretty decent job with them. But if it's coming to like quieter, like really like almost sparse sound effects, like if there's like nothing going on, if it's just like a little bit of clothing rustle or a little bit of movement here and there and some footsteps,
Breaths.
I don't know, a student film about why the husband is coming home so late and say, just tell me about the cheating that you've been doing, and he's like, I have cancer, and you're like, okay. But that's, I feel like I attribute that more to lack of enthusiasm rather than lack of creativity on the sound design, because there's only so many ways you can make that sound interesting.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
I know that I'm easily bored. That's my weakness.
Sounds a little too French theater for me, I'd say.
Avant-garde.
Avant.
Fun fact, I learned all of my undergrad at an avant-garde filmmaking school, which I was not informed was going to be populated by almost exclusively avant-garde filmmakers until I was 2 years into my diploma, and I was learning about Jean-Luc Godard for the 7th goddamn time that year.
What? Yeah.
I wrote up my thesis from that class was me meticulously explaining why that teacher was not good at teaching film to people, and he gave me a B.
Wow. Nice.
It's just
Gosh.
stupid. Anyway.
No, yeah, absolutely. No, I've pulled a similar thing and gotten this, and like just, yeah, some teachers I completely understand. What?
But in terms of maintaining style, I have one last note to suggest.
Please. No,
we're
absolutely.
doing sound design. Very much like when you're animating for a cartoon, so much of what makes it real and believable and cohesive is by your layers. Like a drawing is not just a stick figure, unless that's what you're going for. But even Don Hertzfeldt, what he lacks in texture in terms of the detail of the character, he makes up elsewhere. You look at a Don Hertzfeldt picture, and even though like it's a stick figure moving around, it's moving it like with astonishing fluidity.
Oh yeah.
And if you're going to be making a sound effect for like a particular character, find what I would call the cornerstone, like that one sound quality within the character that you want to have maintained through all of their sound design, and keep that somewhere in the sound effect. It doesn't have to be at the front, it doesn't have to be very loud, or it just has to be somewhere in there that can help add to it, or at least similar instruments or pieces or something like that. Case in point, trying to think of a good example of this. I recently was working on an audio drama called The Sojourn, and there is a alien sound effect that we use as like this big laser that cuts like a ship in half.
Okay.
It's very intimidating and it's very scary, and I have this sound of a baby crying that I stretched out and modified to have like an almost like uncomfortable quality to it, because the idea is that this baby sound taps into that visceral lizard part of our brains that register baby crying with discomfort and need to address quickly.
Right.
And I use that as part of it. When they're using sidearms and regular firing, I have a smaller version of that sound weaved into the sound effect. So it
Okay.
sounds like it's made by the same components, but on a smaller scale.
Mm-hmm. Nice. One character's whose sound footprint, if you will, that I wanted to specifically talk about was Mordecai in Lackadaisy. Just to go back onto that project.
Oh, yeah. So Mordecai, funny enough, there was a couple of things about Mordecai that you would find very interesting. One is that I had to fight really hard to get him to make cat noises. When in the part where like the water tower comes down and
Mm-hmm.
the water starts rushing towards him, Mordecai hisses. That's not Pro ZD. That is my cat making hissing noises because I was picking her up like the 80th time to try and get her to make that noise. I actually called up the creator with the director and the sound mixer on speed dial to like tell him like, okay, we want to add cat noises to Mordecai. I'm like, I don't want to do that. Like that's he's not
Of all the characters.
like more cats and stuff. Like, no, it'll be great.
Yeah.
I promise. It's one time, it'll make a huge difference. And every time somebody watches that movie, they're like, I love that Mordecai hisses like a cat.
Yeah, like of all the characters, Mordecai's the one who you'd expect it least out of, right? Like of all the characters,
but like it is such an extreme scenario that you're like, it does make sense that he does cat.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And he would never admit it, and he would hate it if you said that he made that noise.
Exactly. But the big thing that I ended up adding, which I can take like credit for on this one,
Mm-hmm.
is his acoustic signature.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that I started using. I started like trying to implement way back in college, where I would give each character their own particular prop or design or aspect of them that when you listen to it, you're like, that's this character.
Mm-hmm.
Almost every character in this show has something like that. Seraphine has like this bone necklace or something about her, as well as like the BAR or the Browning. We've got like Rocky with a lot of the dynamite and like the tap dancing shoes and stuff. We've got Freckle with his like little cat perfs and animal sounds, and even when he pulls out the Tommy gun and screams, there's like a tiger sound like weaved into that as like part of the hit. But Mordecai's was a little challenging because he doesn't move very much. He doesn't do very much. But when he does do, it makes a huge difference.
Right.
So I spoke while it was like, I want to say it was a Friday night about 2:00 in the morning. And I was still like piecing together all the sound effects and stuff. And I didn't finish until like 10:30 that morning. And I was talking to Tracy about, okay, I don't know too much about Mordecai. What are some props? What are some items in his life that are important to him?
Mm-hmm.
And she starts listing off a bunch of things, and eventually she came to the pocket watch.
Right.
And I said, the pocket watch is his professionalism externalized into an understanding of the world around him. Whenever he is highly focused, that's the one thing that he is hearing that's being steady and constant. Because that pocket watch is very important to his backstory. But we go even further than that, where the first time it was more of like, this would be like a really cool moment or something to add to the tension of him focusing. But when I got to the second scene, I told him I want to bring this back. I want to bring this theme back. And like, why do you want to do that? I said, because the pocket watch isn't just him focusing. It's a tactical maneuver. Because he's listening to the tempo of the pocket watch. So that way he's so focused that if he hears something discordant, like footsteps or say someone pulling up their handgun to fire at him, he immediately hears it and immediately like picks it out. so that he can tune out everything else except for like the important little tiny features of his focus, so that he has a tactical advantage in a fight.
Mm-hmm. It also thematically complements his, I'll say neurodivergency, because Mordecai is very OCD. Like, that's very baked into who the character is. And a pocket watch with the precision, and it must be precise, is just a really good personification of the character, in my opinion.
Yeah, considering that, like, what we have like the world's most pathetic sounding Derringer in Freckles' hand, which only sounds threatening when they're in that reverberant space, because it is a point where it's much more dangerous. But like outside in the exterior, it's so pathetic sounding, it just doesn't carry at all. But you hear him like, pull back you hear him like get his gun ready, like holding it up ready to fire him.
Yeah.
And you hear the like the little like small metal clink that causes Mordecai to react. Gives his position away, even though he's not really making that much noise.
That was awesome. So
I'm playing with this. Funny enough, fun fact: if you ever want to learn a cheap way to do gun foley, this is a simple way to do it. Just get like a doorknob kit, and you can get away with that a little bit.
Nice.
At least for the smaller bits. It's also fun to play with. But...
on the note, I wanted to bring up a game that had a very interesting function. Have you played Divinity: Original Sin 2?
I've played the first one, yes. Well, I played Divinity: Original Sin, not the second one.
Okay, I don't remember if it was in the first one or not, but in the second one I know for certainty. At character creation, you actually get to pick an instrument. And your character doesn't play an instrument. Yeah, but that becomes their signature for when you get a crit, for when combat ends, if that character was, when they have a narrative beat. So in character creation, they get a bit of soundscape attributed to them.
That's something I really love when games allow you to decide your soundscape for your characters.
Yeah.
The two that I love the most that they did that, which one was like a really fun game, and the other one was like a pachinko machine brought to real life. One was Saints Row, where you could actually choose the voice of your main character, but in a way that added so much personality to what they did. Because like there's three in Saints Row 4, they actually gave you 4 characters to speak as. There was the generic white guy. There was the guy that sounded like they were a minority. There was the third guy that sounded Australian, who was my favorite choice. And then literally Nolan North. His name, just the selection on there is just literally Nolan North. And the other one was Skylanders, which is not a great game, because a lot of it requires you having like a bunch of collectibles and stuff, and I would describe that collectible experience as a pause menu with more steps.
And pay to win, for that matter.
What's really cool is that the Imaginators were a Skylander hero that you could customize and build from the ground up. You could customize how their voice sounded, and you could even make their sound effects depending on what kind of element they wanted to use, what kind of attacks you wanted them to use. Like at one point, my roommate, who went a little bit too nuts on the Skylanders thing, made his like bird water mage thing sound like this robot, and they would have like catchphrases that you could actually like enter a bunch of different like words for them to say when they do their thing. So like when they do their battle cry, they actually have like a couple of lines that they can use from, and that's cute. That's really cool. Yeah, and that like gives kids like a bit of a control over how they want their characters to sound.
So, what is the first show or experience, I guess, to just make it a little bit more broad, that really, as a kid growing up, that made you realize that sound designers were specifically a thing, that they were a part of the equation? Because I know what mine was, but I really want to hear what yours is.
I want to hear yours first, actually.
Batman the Animated Series.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was
Definitely.
when I just sat up and said, "Oh, wait, this isn't just sound effects. This is a craft." You know?
Believe it or not, I was a very young age when I found this out, or
Hmm.
when I came to this conclusion. And I actually mentioned it earlier in this podcast, and it was the space between Mr. Freer's ears.
Hmm.
The space between Mr. Freer's ears was an interstitial thing on Nickelodeon back when like Nickelodeon didn't quite have enough programming yet, and they were still trying to get their bearings. And the story is a gentleman that goes by the name of Mr. Freer walks into a place and noise, and then he leaves. It's like 2 minutes long, not even. But
Hmm.
one of my favorites that ends up happening in that was he has an episode where he goes to a barber shop and he sits down and he waits to get his hair cut, and the barber is taking the straight razor and going like up and down on the belt like and then you hear another barber like slamming his foot down on the chair to like raise up the hydraulics, so it's like and throughout this entire sequence Mr. Freer is just looking around and just all these sounds are playing and it turns into an orchestra of strange noises. And it's very cute, it's very endearing, and it highlighted how much sound dictates our relationship with the world around us.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
And when I was a little kid, I'm like, man, that's really cool. And I started listening to stuff in real life, trying to see if I would find those patterns. And sure enough, it happens once in a while.
Yeah. Hmm. I've also seen some interesting research about ambient sound volume and its effect developmentally on people who grew up in areas with a lot of noise, and like just like in in the middle of a city or by a highway, and it just
Oh, yeah.
it just affects the way you think. It just affects the way that you learn to think. It's just a core
Um,
part of who you are.
Sound was always like a really important thing for me because I discovered I was an auditory learner.
Hmm.
And this was accentuated by the fact that when I was a young child, I lived on a sailboat,
Hmm.
and when we were in dock, we would have an air conditioner going. But like the air conditioner wasn't like large vents throughout the entire boat. No, they were like these tiny, isolated units specifically within the boat.
Hmm.
So like each air conditioner in each room was its own individual air unit. Um, and I loved that because I'd always go to sleep to it.
Oh.
And when the boat was going, when we were out at sea, the air conditioners would be off, but the boat engines would be on. I'd fall asleep to that.
Hmm.
And then there were periods we didn't have the air conditioner anymore, and I couldn't sleep
Hmm.
because that sound, when there wasn't any sound going on, I thought my brain kept telling me something was wrong.
Okay.
It's interesting how like white
Yeah.
noise of that kind can dictate your ability to sleep. I still sleep with a fan because of that.
That's
In
interesting.
fact, I've got one right here. Ah, jeez, I'm so sorry. Right here.
Hmm. Just to give you the white
Um,
noise that feels more comfortable to you. That's
Well, also
really
because
interesting.
this room is like 30 degrees hotter. It's like 10 degrees hotter than the rest of the house.
Oh, fair enough then. So, on that note, 433, genius or pretentious?
433.
John Cage?
I'm gonna have to look that up because I don't know what you mean.
Oh, it's a song that's 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence.
Oh, I'd say a little pretentious. To be
Okay,
honest.
fair.
If it's
And-
just silence, and then like you have to understand, I came when I was ailed by the avant-garde bug because
yeah.
so much of that, like I really don't like excessive pretentiousness.
Well,
I like a little pretentiousness. Though.
Okay,
Like,
okay.
There's sometimes when I can get really into it. Like one of my favorite filmmakers was oh my god, Jacques Tati. You might know him as a French filmmaker who invented the concept of Mr. Bean.
Oh.
Most of his films are like pantomime things of just like his character Monsieur Hulot bumbling into a scene and just making a complete nuisance of himself.
Mm-hmm.
But it has a lot of really clever storytelling going on in the background. Like one of my favorite movies of his is called Mon Oncle, which is about him trying to get a job at a company, and the owner of said company has this like needlessly high-tech, complicated monstrosity of a smart house, where in order for them to like cook a meal, they have to hit like 5 or 6 buttons to activate a bunch of nonsense to even get to it. Which is like a commentary about like the pointlessness of too much modernization.
Mm-hmm. Smart refrigerators and all that. Well, the reason I brought up 433 is because the stated intent of it is to get people to listen to the ambient sound of the room as an active thing, like to actually intentionally sit down and listen to what is just around you rather than a specific musician, which is people don't tend to do. So it seemed like it was in that vein, though it is pretentious. I'm not denying that. That's why I was tying it in.
Times where like a big thing about our brains that we take for granted is the cocktail party effect, which is the ability for our brains to tune out unnecessary noise that is not providing any extra information to us. Right now, the sound of my computer is making a racket because it's like a big tower that I use for editing and stuff, and it's constantly like. But it's not information that my brain needs right now because I'm focusing on listening to you.
Right.
With, stuff in my earphones, so my brain's tuned it out. Especially when I'm talking, because if I'm talking while something else is like playing over it, it can disrupt my train of thought. Great example of this is have yourself listen to a recording of yourself from 6 seconds ago and try to see if you can talk coherently. Yes. It is the worst.
Yeah. I had to do that for a class back in Oh, it's painful. Something in that just forces you to slip up in your brain mind. It just does not jive. Shifting gears a little bit. Before we shift gears, how do you feel about ANC headphones when we're working? Because some people use them, some people don't use them, some people use them for watching things, some people don't. I'm curious, as a sound designer, do you use noise-canceling headphones, or do you think that is that going to change something? I don't know. I'm curious on your thoughts.
There are two types of headphones that I use for studio work. There's closed ear headphones, which is what I'm wearing right now, and open ear headphones, which are definitely here. Here they are. Whoops.
Ah, okay.
Sorry. And open ear headphones, which is meant for more mixing.
Okay.
Not to mention these are more comfortable. Now, open ear headphones are like the sound bleeds out of the sides here. And the reason for that is that it allows you to listen to the room that you're in as part of the mix. And gives you a better idea of what it is that you're hearing for. Because closed ear, it's very contained. It's very stifled. Noise-canceling earphones are really great if you need to focus on something, if you're in a loud environment or something like that. I would not recommend it for sound mixing because the way that noise-canceling headphones work is that it plays it listens to the environment around it and plays a counter signal to cancel itself out.
Right.
So it's actually playing noise in your ear so that your brain cancels out the other noise.
Okay.
Which is very weird, but you know.
Yeah.
Our brains
do
are
be
kind of
weird.
peculiar like that. So yeah, I personally wouldn't recommend noise-canceling earphones unless you're like at a train station, but why would you be sound mixing at a train station?
Yeah, fair.
Tell me. So we don't choose where we live.
Yeah. Sometimes you got to break out the laptop, I guess. On that note, what software do you use for your work?
I use Pro Tools, but it's not just Pro Tools that I use. I use a combination of programs for a couple of things, depending on the software that I need. I've used Soundweaver to construct sound effects if I need something like really quick and dirty. but I prefer having Pro Tools like there so I can like build something more meticulous. Like if they're like, we need a good slam sound effect, I'm like, I don't want to weave this thing together. I'll open up Soundweaver and grab like 10 or 20 sounds, audition them, piece them together, and then drag them into Pro Tools. But I also have like dozens of plugins that I use. I've used some stuff from Waves. I've used some stuff from Pro Tools' main suite. I think M Audio I've done a couple from. They're pretty nice.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorites is Polyverse. They've got a lot of fun plugins. One program that I use a lot is called SoundMiner. I have about 12 terabytes of sound effects in my possession. Needless to say, if I need to find a very specific fart sound effect, if I try using a traditional Windows Media thing, it's going to take me 2 hours to find a sound effect I like. SoundMiner compartmentalizes all of it and like organizes it so it doesn't have to like do that query all at once. It's already got the database ready, and I can just drag and drop it all into my Pro Tools without having to worry about it. You can get like the basic program for like $200. It's pretty nice, especially if you have like a lot of sound effects. Which my sound effects are a combination of like library sounds, like the BBC library, the Hanna-Barbera library. I've gotten a couple of really great libraries from Boom Library. And quite a few other things that I've made myself over the years that I've like just been collecting and piling together.
Yeah, nice. We actually have the first place prize for this Go Godot Game Jam actually is a sound library.
Ooh, what sound library?
Let me double check real quick. Let me pull it up real. There we go. It's Pro Music.
Pro Music. Okay, yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah, it's equivalent of almost $1,000 worth of Pro Music plugins and samples.
Oh yeah, that would be really good. That's a good prize.
Yeah, we were looking for prizes. It was like, okay, what can we get that A is going to actually be useful to people, that B people don't already have, right? Because
I assume a lot of people would be like, oh yeah, I want some, I'd love some Foley essentials or something like that, some like basic Foley footsteps and the like, which is very useful, but not everybody needs that.
Right.
Funny enough, like one thing that I discovered is that the sound suite libraries between cartoon sound effects, between Western cartoons and Japanese cartoons, are night and day.
Yeah.
It's kind of wild. Because like there's a lot of like naming convention. There's a lot like acoustic conventions and stuff that are fundamentally different from what Americans do in Japan.
Can you give examples? I mean, like I agree with you, but you know, I want to hear some of the examples for the audience.
The reaction sound, like a boing or like a moo or something like that. In Western, they use a lot of like wind instruments or like wacky noisemakers or something like that. And in Japan, they use a lot of bells and tinks and clinks and the like. Like or like something that like has a little bit of a bow to it, like I don't know, like a Japanese noise could be like something along the lines of, or like something like that. Whereas like a cartoon noise for Americans would be maybe along the lines of, or just like just that kind of a reaction. I even have like a little tiny like bird whistle thing here. I pour some water into it and it makes like a.
Oh yeah, I've seen those. Nice.
Those little sounds can actually like make a difference in terms of tone. For that anime, depending on what you're doing.
Yeah, going back into the idea, concept of soundscapes. So when someone said,
like a fun experiment that I recommend trying at least once if you're looking into like sound effect libraries or something.
Mhm.
find a Japanese sound effect library, get like a Google translator to translate it to English, and like listen to a couple of sounds that are there, and then listen to the something similar in like an Americanized sound effect library.
Yeah. And then recognize that the a video game library is probably going to be different from both of those, because I've seen several of those, and it's just like this is also different.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
will say that like some game effect libraries I can find a little bit lacking, because some people assume that a video gamey sound is just like someone going to town on a synthesizer, and while some of
Yeah.
that can be true, it can be very counterproductive to the tone you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. And it can be heavily dependent on what genre you're in, because you know, video games are a medium, not a genre, right? Same with
Mm-hmm.
same with animation in that regard.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, what I wanted to ask is, what is a skill that you never thought you'd need that consistently keeps coming up, that just keeps on coming in handy to have?
Soft communication.
Hmm.
So, communicating with my clients, my directors, and even my fellow creatives can be a struggle. Not because I'm not approachable. Far from that. I like anybody that works with me will say that I am fantastic to work with.
I can attest.
It's being able to relay the information appropriately.
Mm-hmm.
Speech is a very clumsy method of being able to relay your intentions with somebody. Case in point, when you hear how would you describe that sound?
Squeaky, creaky, I guess.
Squeaky. Okay.
Maybe
All right, you say squeaky, right?
squeaky or creaky. Yeah.
Yeah, so what I would say is like I would actually describe that as creaking tension. Like something that sounds stressful. Like
Yeah.
now that's a fundamentally different description than what you gave me.
Mm-hmm.
And my job a lot of times is trying to parse what it is they're trying to ask me.
Mm.
And for me to relay back to them what it is that they're looking for. Great example of this is Lackadaisy. They came to me and they got to the scene with the water tower where like the blast happens and water's going everywhere, and they said, for some reason this is not enough. And that was it. That's the only description they had. It's like, it's not enough.
The
And
classic graphic designer, make it pop.
the sound designer could not figure out what it was that they were looking for. They added more and more and more and more sound effects to the point where it was just noise. And they're still saying like, yeah, it still doesn't feel like enough.
Mm-hmm.
And the sound designer's like, I have like the loudest noises playing all at once. Why is this not working? I get in there and my immediate response is, you're missing the lows. What I mean by the lows is like the big deep vibration to make this thing sound big.
Mm-hmm.
The sound of metal straining and groaning at the sound of like the water like creaking through and destroying all that stuff. It wasn't there because it was just noise otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
And so many times you'll listen to a director or something like that feeling like, yeah, this isn't feeling like enough to me, or there's something off about this. And you have to identify, okay, what is it that they're being bothered by? Sometimes it is important to be able to communicate with them what it is that they're looking for, and sometimes it's important to be able to tell them your brain is playing tricks on you, you need a break. Classic example of this in Lackadaisy was, it was about 12 o'clock in the afternoon. We had been working for about 5 or 6 hours on the final mix day, and the director is listening to these gliss sound effects, like these little chimes that play when Rocky's playing his violin.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, get rid of all of them.
Oh.
I'm really annoyed by these. They're driving me nuts. I hate them. Get rid of them. And I said, now hang on. You don't want to do that. And I said, why not? Like, it's really annoying me. I would just do what I ask and do the thing. I'm like, well, how about this? Let's take a food break, get some tacos, come back, and see how you feel. You're experiencing some fatigue. And they go, okay. So we go get some tacos, come back, listen to it again. They're like, I would never remove this. Why did I think that? Oh my God.
Yeah.
Like that's what it was. You were hangry. You listen for something for too long and you start thinking that you need to get rid of stuff you don't need to get rid of.
I have a funny story. Just your terminology reminded me, if I can indulge for just a moment. It was one of my colleagues, not myself, was working on sound design for. I actually think it was one of the Doom games. I think it was like. Anyways, and he came up with a shotgun sound effect, and shotgun sound effect. He's like, it doesn't sound like it's enough. It's not enough. And he's like, okay, hold on. I have another shotgun sound effect I wanted to run by you for just if we can do a little bit of A/B test. Give me 5 minutes. Went out, took the first sound effect and just boosted the bass on it by a significant amount, but also gave it the 5-minute wait so they could because they also gave them that pause. Came back in and said, "How does this sound?" They're like, "Oh, it sounds fantastic. It's a much better and much different sound than we heard before." It's like, no.
Funny enough, there's a trick in like live sound where somebody says, make sure you always have one knob dedicated to absolutely nothing, so that whenever some performer comes by or a preacher or whoever is doing a presentation says, could you bring me up a little bit? Twist that dial a little bit and say, is that better? And they're like, that's great, thank you. Perfect.
How do you know? That's why you're the best. Yeah.
Sometimes the difference isn't sometimes it's not a huge difference in what you need to do there. It requires a difference in perspective. But I will recommend to any of you that's going to be talking to sound designers or otherwise, there are a couple of basic terms that you should know that help you with your descriptions a little bit that don't have like very common terms. For example, that big sound. If I use the onomatopoeia whoosh, what do you think of?
I think of a truck driving by. A burst of wind.
Or like the sound. Like what I think of is the sound of a trailer when it tries to do that like jump scare thing of suddenly the man is in the door and he's holding a knife and he says, "Tell me about the daisies, Marianne." The bit that's like, oh no, it's scary, but like that, I call that a whoosh.
Okay.
Or like the sound of like a bed of tones or other things like that, slowly building up and then cutting off. That's a riser.
Okay.
Little sounds like little terms like that can help you get an understanding of what it is that you are looking for. Sometimes what you're looking for is a trailer hit. Sometimes what you're looking for is a gliss, which is like, again, like chime noises or something along the lines of that. You want to be able to listen to something and be able to describe it with an adjective that makes them say, oh, I get where you're coming from. I have an idea what you're looking for.
That soft communication. Yeah.
Yeah, that's soft communication. Like sometimes I'll ask a director lots of questions about what it is that they're looking for in this, because they've heard these things before, but they've never had to describe them.
Yeah.
It's like, how do you describe to a person who has never dealt with paints before that they need to mix a little bit more water into their paints?
I just yell at people to thin their paints. I mean,
yeah, but they don't know what that means by thin your paints. Like, do I squeeze the paints? Do I put them into a compression machine? Do I give them a motivational speech about losing weight? You can't assume that they know the same things that you do.
Can't assume they have that vocabulary.
So oftentimes when I'm talking to somebody for like a director or even another sound designer, I will talk to them like they've never dealt with me before, or like they've never dealt with sound design before.
Drop all the jargon.
Yeah, like sometimes I'll drop the jargon unless I know that they're well experienced, and I'll like describe something more easily. Like, there's a lot of sound designers out there that don't know the difference between backgrounds and ambiences. Most people don't either. I didn't until about 1.5 years ago.
Do
if you need the
and
answer to that.
I do.
Backgrounds are sounds that you don't really make adjustments to, like room tone or basic winds or something that kind of drones and you eventually tune out. Ambiences are stuff that cuts through the background that
okay.
help give life to the space.
Makes sense.
Like if I was to describe it back as a painting, backgrounds are the buildings and the streets, and ambiences are the cars and the birds going through those streets.
Okay. I like that description.
Yeah.
Well, I only have one more question here,
Mm-hmm.
and you know what I'm about to say. How would you feel if H Bomber Guy did a video about you? You may now go on as long a rant about Tommy Tallarico as you'd like.
Boy. So yeah, fun thing for those of you who aren't familiar. HR Bomber Guy recently did a documentary about where the oof sound from Roblox came from, and it went from being like a half-hour curiosity to a 2.5-hour takedown piece of a sound designer from the gaming industry. Because he was just running around just claiming that he did everything. But like, I'd say with HR Bomber Guy, I wish that I didn't do anything bad enough for him to, you know, speak in that logical, derisive tone that he does about shows that he's like, this could be a lot better, but why isn't it? Because so far, a lot of the documentaries that I've seen him do stuff for have either been, this game is really incredible, look how intelligent and smart and wonderful it is, why has nobody else done this? To, look at this one idiot that has ruined everything. And I very much don't think I qualify for the former quite as much.
No.
But I also don't think I deserve the latter. But I've actually very briefly met HR Bomber Guy. Funny enough, during the screening of Lackadaisy. We didn't really talk because he was more of like, was invited by a couple of friends to come be present for the screening before it went up on YouTube. If I recall, he's like working on some kind of animated thing. I don't know what. I don't work for him. But I think he's interested in trying to do like a bigger original series that looks really interesting.
Cool. How you doing? You having a good time?
All right.
I'm having a blast.
I will say that, like, in terms of Tommy Tallarico, he does bring to light one very unfortunate thing that is prevalent in the gaming and film industry, and that's that there's a lot of people out there that don't get credit for what they do.
Yeah.
It's not even just video games or movies. Like TV shows and stuff will sometimes not credit all the people that worked on it, and just credit the studio that worked on it. The person who did the interstitials for the Walt Disney theme, the Disney Channel theme, actually was credited to a studio rather than to the person. I recently worked on Velma for HBO Max on the with Warner Brothers and all that stuff, and I wasn't put in the credits. They put my name.
What?
They actually put Atlas Oceanic. My boss didn't even get credit on that one.
Oh wow.
They just marked it as just Atlas Oceanic.
Did you hear what happened with Grant Kirkhope recently?
Grant Kirkhope. Oh yeah, in terms of the Doom thing.
No, the Mario movie.
Oh yeah, they didn't credit him for the DK rap. Yeah, that was terrible.
They didn't credit him. Yeah, and like it's not like it was like some unknown, like it's Grant bloody Kirkhope.
Yeah, like I think that's also his voice that's doing the rap.
It might be, I don't know, it might be, but like yeah, there's a lot of lack of credit. I mean,
and like
it's
one of those things that, like, for a long time I didn't think credits were that important because it was like, okay, movie's over, I can get up and walk out. But the longer that I started working in that field, I started really appreciating the credits because you get to see how many people worked on this project, and sometimes you find names you recognize. Case in point, I didn't realize how much of a fan I was of Joel Valentine until I saw his name in Samurai Jack. And if you don't know Joel Valentine, he is a huge person in the sound design world, especially for animation. He worked on Powerpuff Girls. He worked on Dexter's Lab, Codenamed Kids Next Door. He worked on Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, Samurai Jack, the Super Mario Brothers Super Show, Symbiotic Titan,
Nice.
Wander Over Yonder. He did Primal. He's currently working on Unicorn Eternals. He's so talented. And so much of the language of sound effects is thanks to him in animation. And most people would never know.
Yeah. On a personal side, I've actually, fun fact, I've actually been cut from more credits than I've been in.
I believe that. I've
Yeah.
been cutting plenty of credits too.
And probably the most egregious was when I went back to a place that I worked at like 4 years after I left there, and I found that their new brochure had Mia in it. They no longer had rights to my person at that time. Like at that point, technically that was illegal. I was proud of it because like, oh hey, cool, I'll take a copy of this for my collection. But it's like, oh, apparently. Yeah, and I wasn't credited anywhere at that entire location. Like it was just it's. And in the early days of video games, I'm glad we're past this now, but I don't know if you know this. In the early days of video games, that was by design, because several of the early video game companies didn't want the talents to get sniped, so they would intentionally put in, nicknames and not allow them to use their proper names. More for Japan than in
Japan's pretty
here,
rife with that kind of thing. Funny enough, there's
Yeah.
a lot of people who are like designers and developers in Japan where, because they did such a good job and accidentally showed up their superior, they ended up getting fired. And there's an entire video game company in Japan dedicated to picking up those people that got blacklisted in the gaming industry, and that's Xseed. And if you're wondering if like what kind of names get blacklisted in Japan about that, Nobuo Umatsu got blacklisted for a little while because of that.
Oh wow.
It's crazy. But yeah, the lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
No worries. But yeah.
Do you have any other questions for me in regards to sound?
Not in particular. I mean, I figure we're just gonna vibe for a little while until whatever. We're right around the 2-hour mark. Honestly, I was expecting this to be an hour interview, but this has been an absolute delight, and we can keep on going for as long as we want to hang out.
I'm looking at the comments right now and see Jack Shadow says, "Great, now you got me wanting to watch the opening to Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends." Here's a fun thought exercise for you that I discovered about 3 or 4 years ago.
Oh no!
Play Afrojack's "Take Over Control" and listen to the chorus of it, like the bit where the beat drops and it's like doing the percussive thing, and then listen to Foster's Imaginary opening and tell me that does not fit 1-to-1 with each other.
Oh, is that one of the things like what was it? Wasn't this something you could play alongside Wizard of Oz that's supposed to track with the whole movie?
I forget. It was like like a Pink Floyd album's Dark Side of the Moon.
Something like that. Not my kind.
I'm not talking about like, oh, it fits in terms of like thematically. I'm saying they sound like they could fit in the same song.
Ah, okay. Nice.
Like you could probably do a YouTube poop of that Afrojack song and mix it to Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends and call it a dubstep remix of Foster's.
On that note, if anyone has any questions from chat, feel free to fire them off, or if you're watching this after the fact, feel free to put them in the comments. But I will say that on my
answer them as best I can.
Yeah, I will say that on my channel when I'm doing Let's Plays, I always watch through all the credits of every game I play, because otherwise, people who are experiencing the game through me won't see them, and that's a tragedy.
All right, here's one. I have a question that hasn't been asked already. What is the most absurd thing you've done to get the perfect sound? I've got 3 of those.
Okay.
First one is pretty short. I needed to make some goo noises for my audio drama, Magus Elgar. Episode 7 has this goo monster made out of antifungal gel. It's a fun show. And I didn't know what sound would be good for it, so I bought a bunch of Jell-O and I bought a bunch of pudding, and I recorded myself playing with that for 4 hours, and that got rank.
Oh no.
Because if you're massaging Jell-O for like 2 hours, that stuff just turns into water. And if you're massaging pudding with gloves in a similar environment in, 80-degree room, that gets gross and stinky after a while, and it made me pretty ailed to that. And the other 2 were sounds that I got to do design work for a short film called Amaterasu. It was done by the Jim Henson Company, or a subsidiary of the Jim Henson Company, about the creation myth of the goddess of the sun from Japanese lore.
Shinto, I believe.
Told entirely through scrap metal puppets.
Oh.
It's really cool. It's like the goddess Amaterasu is portrayed as like this golden chandelier with like gold, with like glass like jingling from it and stuff, and Susanoo is like this helmet, like this bathysphere diver and all that stuff. So I needed to get like good underwater sounds, but I didn't have a library of underwater noises. It sounded good. So what I did was I took a big gallon jug, shoved a shotgun microphone in it, and submerged it into a pool in my Foley stage. And recorded that. Mixed results, but it was good. Oops. The other sound that I did from that exact short film was the tone of the kami. Now, the kami was like this life force that was passing through everything, and I portrayed that through like some rain sticks and stuff, but there was a general tone that I wanted to add for it. And I found these massive wind chimes. Like, I'm trying to remember the name of them.
I think I know who you're referring to, actually.
They were like these very large wind chimes that were like as large as I was. So like when you hit these as a tone, it would be like this big kind of thing when you rang them. And it was really cool. Like, it was a really cool sound. What ended up happening was that I would I went to a hardware store and I found this thing, and I asked the hardware store if I could borrow them. Not buy them, because if I bought them, it was $700, and this thing was as large as I was. So I rented this thing out. Like, I put down $700 in collateral, went and recorded them for a day. And I had to hang them up on like a bunch of poles and stuff because it was like really large. This is like the kind of thing that you would hang in front of a mansion. Like, it was big. And I would ring these things out, and I still have those recordings that I use every once in a while. And they have like this wonderful chorus sound that comes up. What?
Was it Music of Spheres? Is that?
No, it was like I think it was like Gregorian or something like that. I can't remember the exact type of.
Okay, because I know they make wind chimes that go up to like 2 meters in length. Like, they make these super bass ones.
Yeah,
very beautiful.
I can't remember the name of them. Wish I did. They were really great wind chimes.
If you figure it out, let me know. I'd like to hear it.
Yeah, like, it wasn't wood. It was like these big metal things, and I loved them. They were a lot of fun. But I'm seeing a question in the comments here. Who's the one that came up with the glass sound effect to drink it, or for when they were drinking? Yeah, who came up with the glass cracking sound effect for the drinking of the whiskey? That was me. I wanted to create the sound of trying to eat something and then suddenly feeling that you were in danger. So what it was is that I told them, I was like, let me just come up with a sound here. And they're like, we don't want something too cartoony. I go, no. What I want is the sound of the equivalent of you biting into a soft peanut butter and jelly sandwich and then feeling a rock.
Yeah.
Just crunch. And you're like, oh, that's not good. Was that my tooth? So, like, at first I tried, like, a glass scraping sound, and that didn't feel right. But then the glass crunch noise, they're like, oh, just made you feel like a visceral, oh, dear.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. What else here?
I'd also like...
sound, certain thing you've done to get the perfect sound. Sorry, go ahead.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, show off some of what you have within arm's reach, because I've seen some of your desk before, and...
So I've got this tiny little meditation bell here. This is like a little meditation bowl for like deeper meditation and the like. But if you manage to circle around it, I've got like a... Ooh, right here. Ooh, got it. What's cool is that I have this like little hammer that goes with them. This is the bigger version of it, so... It's like a tiny little ringing noise, but I have a bigger one. This big guy. There's a smaller one of these over here. That's probably what that's for. But if I do this, this is the loudest meditation bowl that I have. I got this at a Renaissance festival.
Nice.
Which I need to go back before they close, but... I don't want it to go too loud, but it's a very loud one.
Yeah, that comes through.
Yeah, like it's very apparent. Let's see, what else do I have here? I've got this steel wire brush that I use on occasion. You know. Oh no, it's zooming in on the wrong face.
That was funny. I think the noise cancellation in Discord is mostly
like some of it gets canceled out, but like I've got these wooden slats that I use. Has a nice little quality to it.
Little clappers.
I was playing these earlier. A little harsh, but you know. I've got a kalimba, which I love pulling this thing out every once in a while. Especially when I have the metal hammer and I need to make like really fun clockwork noises. But I got this thing for like pretty cheap, like $30-$40. It's really nice.
Oh, nice.
And have you made the Wilhelm scream gun yet? No, I haven't. I want to. I'm not sure if you know what I'm talking about on that one, Jade.
I'm not sure I do.
So I in one of my interviews a while back, or like in a conversation, I don't know where exactly, but everybody uses the Wilhelm scream. And
of course.
The reason for that is that it started off as a running gag by a sound designer who liked the noise and just started using it in everything, and then it became like a common joke to put into your production. And it's a fun sound. It's a fun thing. Yeah, I was in my last interview with you. I was describing that if I was ever going to do the Wilhelm scream, I would kill that joke. And I had this idea that I would make a minigun that would shoot, and the sound that would make is just the Wilhelm scream looped a million times.
That's right. I forgot about that. Yeah. I actually recently found the full audio for the recording session of the guy doing the Wilhelm scream.
Oh yeah, it's
cool.
It's fun. It's kind of like there's a couple of screams out there that are really recognizable and identifiable that you really appreciate. And at first I didn't like hearing that same sound over and over again, but there's a certain tonal quality that you appreciate for being able to recognize those sounds. Like everybody knows the Tom and Jerry scream. And That's I believe it was Joseph Barbera screaming into the microphone. Like all those the original screams were him.
Makes sense.
I loved it so much that I ended up making one of my own for Zoophobia. It was fun. Like being able to make those kinds of sounds is a lot of fun, especially if you end up hearing it in the wild on its own.
Yeah.
Let's see if there's any other questions. Will you the Wilhelm scream yet? Who came up with the glass cracking sound? Yeah, that's all those.
All right. Well, it is a delight and a pleasure as always.
Of course, and I'm glad that you had me come back again.
Yeah. Well, and we'll have you back on next Friday because we have our our tabletop game.
Right. That should be good.
Yeah, I'm enjoying how that game's going a lot. Did you have any final thoughts for people who are in the games industry or who are trying to get into the sound design?
If you are in the games industry, do not underestimate the potential you have with being able to do storytelling through your audio. Great examples of games that do this very well are Inscription, as I mentioned earlier, Hi-Fi Rush, and oddly enough, The Return of the Obra Dinn, where so much of its storytelling is told through its sound design. And if you are a sound designer going into this, don't be afraid to find an animation that you like, or like an animator that's struggling, and sound design it. Then send it to them. See if they like it. It's a good way to get practice, and it's a good way to meet new people that are less experienced with sound design than you might be.
Good advice. Networking is very important. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody. You are all wonderful, and I appreciate all of you.
Yep, thank you for having me.
Be sure to like the video if you had a good time. Dislike it if you didn't. I accept my fate. And we'll see you again real soon.
Bye-bye.
Cheers, friends.